The explosion took out the communications tower at 0217. Sergeant Cole Briggs heard it go, a flat, concussive crack followed by the sound of metal folding into itself, and knew before the echo died that they were alone. No radio, no satellite uplink, no way to reach the battalion 12 kilometers north, or the QRF that existed only as a promise on a briefing slide 3 days ago. The firebase had 31 men, 2 working vehicles, and a perimeter that had been designed for a full company and was being held by a third of one. Then the first wave hit the eastern gate. 41 insurgents, 2 RPGs, a vehicle-borne device that took out the generator on the second pass and dropped the base into darkness so complete it felt like pressure on the eyes. Men were shouting. The wounded were already being dragged toward the aid station. Briggs was at the command post trying to raise anyone on a radio that produced nothing but static and the distant sound of his own breathing. He did not hear her move. He only knew she was gone when he turned and found the position at the northeast corner, the position she had told her to hold until further orders, empty. Just a set of boot prints in the loose dust, moving toward the wall. Before we go any further, if this story already has you, hit that subscribe button right now and stay with me until the very last word. Drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story reaches. Her name was Senior Chief Petty Officer Nora Voss, though the men of Firebase Kilo did not know that yet. They knew a woman had arrived with the resupply convoy 4 days ago, attached to no unit anyone could identify, carrying orders that the base commander had read twice before filing without comment. They knew she was quiet. They knew she had taken the northeast corner of the perimeter on the first night without being asked, and had not left it for more than 20 minutes at a stretch since. They did not know anything else. She was not large, 5'4", lean in the way that distance runners are lean. Nothing extra, nothing wasted. Brown eyes that cataloged a room the way a camera catalogs a crime scene. Systematically, without sentiment, missing nothing, she wore no rank visible on her uniform. She carried a modified M4 and a suppressed sidearm and a medical kit that was significantly more comprehensive than the one issued to standard infantry personnel, a fact that the base medic, Corporal Adkins, had noticed on day 2 and mentioned to nobody because mentioning it felt like the kind of thing that would require a conversation he did not know how to finish. She had spoken 11 words in 4 days. 7 of them were directional. 2 were confirmations. The remaining 2 were spoken to Adkins on the afternoon of the second day when she walked past the aid station, looked through the open door, assessed the supply situation in 4 seconds, and said, without stopping, "You are low on quick clot." He had checked. She was right. Nobody had introduced her formally to the firebase. She had arrived, found her position, and oriented herself to the terrain with the focused efficiency of someone returning to a place they had studied on paper and needed to verify in person. She had walked the entire perimeter on the first evening. Not quickly, not slowly, with the deliberate pace of someone measuring distances and memorizing angles and cataloging fields of fire with a precision that the 2 sentries she passed had found unsettling in a way neither of them could. Specifically, name. Staff Sergeant Dean Purcell had tried. Purcell was the kind of man who filled silence because he found it personally offensive. Loud, certain, occupying whatever room he was in at a volume slightly higher than necessary. He had approached her on the second morning at the mess table, sat across from her with the particular confidence of a man who has never in his life had a conversation go badly for him, and said, "So what exactly is your deal?" She looked up from her meal. "Support asset," he continued. "Intel. You don't look like infantry." He said it the way people say things that are technically not insults, but are engineered to function as one. No offense. She looked at him for exactly the length of time it takes to make a person aware that they have said something revealing about themselves, and then she looked back at her food. "Okay," he said, readjusting. "Silent type. Got it." He leaned back, just figured since we're sharing a perimeter for the next week, might as well. "Your sector has a dead angle at 40 meters, bearing 260, she said. Not looking up, between the fuel depot and the generator housing, a 3-person team moving in file could reach the interior wire without being seen from your position or the watchtower. I would close it before 2200. Purcell stared at her. She finished her meal, stood, and left. He went and checked the angle. It was exactly as she had described. He spent the next hour repositioning 2 sandbag emplacements. He did not tell anyone why. On day 3, Purcell tried again. This time it was evening, and she was at her position on the northeast corner. And he approached from behind in the way that people approach someone they expect to startle, and was entirely unprepared for the fact that she was already looking at him when he got there. Before he had made a sound, before he had crossed the 10 feet of open ground between them. "How did you?" he started. "Your boots," she said. "Left heel is worn. Creates a specific sound pattern on compacted dirt. Recognizable at 15 meters if there is no wind." She paused. "There is no wind tonight." He stood there for a moment. "You are either extremely impressive," he said, "or extremely strange. Both are possible," she said, and went back to watching the wire. He went back to his position and did not approach her again. But that evening, he moved his cot 40 feet to give himself a better sightline to the northeast corner. He did not examine this decision too carefully. The attack came at 0217 on day 4. It came in the specific configuration that experienced fighters use against undermanned positions. Coordinated, layered, and timed to arrive immediately after the shift change when the outgoing sentries are tired and the incoming sentries are not yet fully oriented. The communications tower went first, which was not an accident. It was the first objective taken out by a single well-placed shot from the ridge 400 meters east before the ground element moved. The generator went 11 seconds later, and then the eastern gate and the night coming apart at the seams. Nora Voss heard the communications tower go and was already moving before the echo cleared. She had planned for this. Not this specifically. She had planned for a version of this, for the version where the communications went first and the power went second, and the assault element came from the east while the secondary force probed the northern wire to split the defense. She had identified this probability pattern on the first night, walking the perimeter, reading the terrain the way she had been trained to read it across 9 deployments, 41 operations, and more hours of silent preparation than she had ever tried to count. She had a mentor once who told her that the gap between a good operator and a great one is not courage. Courage is table stakes, the minimum required to show up. The gap is what you do with the hours before the thing happens, in the dark and the quiet and the waiting, when no one is testing you and no one would know the difference if you stopped. His name was Master Chief Gerald Tate. He had died in an elevator ambush in Mosul in 2009, and she had carried everything he ever told her like equipment she was not permitted to set down. She reached the northeast corner and went straight past it. The corner was her assigned position. The corner was also, she had calculated 72 hours ago, not the position that mattered most in the specific attack pattern she had been anticipating. The position that mattered most was the rooftop of the equipment storage building, 40 meters inside the wire, elevation plus 6 meters, unobstructed line of sight to the eastern approach, and the 2 flanking positions she had identified as the most likely anchor points for a coordinated assault. She reached it in 90 seconds, went up the exterior ladder without slowing, went prone at the rooftop's northern edge, and looked through her scope. What she saw confirmed what she had calculated. 41 fighters in 2 elements. The eastern gate element was the distraction. Loud, aggressive, drawing fire and attention. The real threat was the flanking team. 17 fighters moving along the drainage ditch on the fire base's southern perimeter, using the darkness and the noise of the eastern assault as cover. They were 60 seconds from the wire. When they hit it, they would have a clean penetration into the interior of the base, and the firebase would be fighting in 2 directions simultaneously with 31 men who were already reacting rather than anticipating. She keyed her radio. Static. She keyed it again. Same. She set it down, controlled her breathing, and began working. The suppressor on her M4 made each shot a flat, directional crack that was absorbed into the larger noise of the firefight at the eastern gate. The flanking element's lead man went down at 63 meters. The second and third went down before the element understood what was happening. By the time they had identified her position, she had already shifted, moving along the rooftop to a secondary position she had identified on the first evening, because she had known then that if she ever needed this rooftop, she would need 2 positions on it, and not 1. The flanking assault stopped. It did not retreat, it reorganized. She had expected this. She moved back to the primary position and waited, controlling her breathing, her heart rate down to the level she had trained for, 58 beats per minute in a firefight, a fact that her qualification instructors had noted in her file with language she had never seen applied to anyone else in the program. The second probe came at 0241. They had adapted. They sent a smaller element along the drainage ditch, while the larger group moved to the fire base's western approach, attempting to split her attention across two vectors simultaneously. It was a competent tactical adjustment. She processed it in 4 seconds and made the decision in 5. The western approach was covered by 3 defensive positions, with overlapping fields of fire. The drainage ditch was covered by 1 person. Her. She stayed on the rooftop. Hour 2 was the hardest. The assault on the eastern gate had found a gap in the defensive line and breached the outer wire. 4 insurgents were inside the perimeter. She heard the shouting, heard the sound of close quarters fighting she could not see, heard Briggs's voice cutting through the radio static. The radio that was not working, that produced nothing but fragments and white noise, that kept making sounds like sentences without completing any of them. She could not go to the gate. The rooftop was the only thing standing between the flanking force and the interior of the base. If she left it, the 17 fighters in the drainage ditch would be at the interior wire in 4 minutes. She stayed. Hour 3, the flanking element made its third probe. This one was different. They sent a 2-man element to her last known position on the rooftop, while the main group pushed from a new angle using a dry creek bed she had not fully mapped. She had underestimated the creek bed by 20 meters. She adjusted. She moved to the rooftop's eastern lip, exposed, firing at a vector that required her to stand briefly rather than stay prone, and took a fragment of rock shrapnel across the left forearm when a round hit the parapet 6 inches from her elbow. She did not stop. She wrapped the arm with a strip of cloth from her kit without looking at it, because she could tell by the sensation that it was surface damage and not structural. And structural was the only category that changed the calculation. Hour 4. The fire-based defenders had stabilized the eastern gate breach. She could hear it in the sound of the firefight. The quality of the shooting changed, became more controlled, the kind of rhythm that means a line has been reestablished and held. She had 2/3 of a magazine left on her primary and 4 full magazines on her person. She had been counting every round. Hour 5. A man appeared at the base of the storage building. Not an insurgent. Purcell, moving low in the darkness, reaching the ladder. He came up fast, which told her he had already been under fire. He reached the rooftop and went flat next to her and looked over the parapet and was silent for a moment. "There are 11 of them left in the ditch," she said, not turning her head. "They have not moved in 22 minutes. They are waiting for a signal from the eastern element. When the eastern fight ends, they will move." He looked at her. Her arm was wrapped in cloth that had soaked through. Her position on the rooftop showed the evidence of 5 hours of movement. Boot marks in every quadrant, brass casings she had been too disciplined to leave where they fell, lined instead in a small, precise row at the rooftop's northern corner. "How long have you been up here?" he said. He looked at the clock on his watch. 0731. "You've been holding this position alone for 11 fighters in the drainage ditch," she said again, still looking through her scope. "When the signal comes, I need you on the western parapet. They will split. 7 will push the wire, and 4 will move to your right, trying to flank whatever position is holding the ditch. Take the 4 on the right. I have the 7. He was quiet for a moment. "You do not outrank me," he said. He said it without heat, almost like a question. She said nothing. "Okay," he said and moved to the western parapet. The signal came at 0803, a single sustained burst of fire from the eastern gate that meant something to the men in the ditch that it did not mean to anyone inside the wire. The 11 fighters moved, and they split exactly as she had said. 7 on the wire and 4 flanking right, and the next 4 minutes were the loudest 4 minutes of Purcell's life. And when it was over, there were no fighters left in the drainage ditch, and the eastern assault had collapsed completely, and the fire base was quiet. Genuinely, completely quiet. She came down from the rooftop at 0849, moving slowly for the first time. Not from injury, though the arm needed proper dressing, but from the specific weight that settles into a body after 11 hours of complete focus. Briggs met her at the base of the building. He had the look of a man who has been surviving rather than thinking for several hours, and has only just caught up to where he is. He looked at her arm. He looked at the rooftop. He looked at her. She started past him toward the aid station. "Chief," he said. He held out his hand. Not a salute. Something more than that, less formal and more real. The kind of gesture that means, I understand what just happened, and I know I cannot fully repay it. She looked at his hand. She shook it once, briefly, with the left hand because the right needed treatment, and walked on toward Adkins's station. Purcell found her there 20 minutes later, arm properly dressed, sitting on an equipment case outside the aid station with her rifle across her knees, looking at the eastern ridge the way you look at something you have learned everything it had to teach you. He sat down near her. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then he said, "I moved the sandbags. On day 3, the angle you told me about." "I know," she said. "I didn't tell anyone. I know that too." He was quiet for another moment. "The creek bed," he said. "You didn't know about it." "No," she said. "But you adjusted." "Yes." He looked at the ridge, then back at her. "Is there anything you cannot do?" She considered this with the same seriousness she appeared to apply to everything. "Sleep," she said. "After. That part is always hard." He nodded, as though this was a reasonable answer to a reasonable question. And they sat there together in the early morning quiet of a firebase that was still standing, because a woman who said almost nothing had spent 11 hours in the dark making sure it would be. The communications relay was restored at 1100. The QRF arrived at 1340. In the debrief that followed, Briggs's report listed 11 hours of sustained defensive action at the northeastern perimeter. 14 confirmed targets neutralized at the drainage ditch approach. 0 penetrations of the interior wire from the southern and western vectors. He listed the asset responsible. The QRF commander read the name. "Read it again." Then he looked up at Briggs with an expression that was not quite surprise, more like the look of a person who has just understood a joke they heard 3 days ago. "She was here the whole time?" he said. "Since day 1, Briggs said. The QRF commander set down the report. Did she say anything when she came down from the rooftop?" Briggs thought about it. The handshake, the walk to the aid station, the look she had given the eastern ridge. "Not much," he said. "There is a kind of strength that announces itself, and a kind that simply acts, and the distance between the two is not measured in rank or credential or the volume of a voice. It is measured in hours, in the hours spent preparing for a moment no one told you was coming, in the hours spent holding a position when holding it was the only thing standing between 31 men and catastrophe, in the hours after, sitting quietly with a wrapped arm and a rifle across your knees, not waiting for credit, because the work was never about credit. Nora Voss held that line for 11 hours because the line needed to be held, and she was the person there to hold it. That is the full extent of her reasoning. Some people will spend their entire lives looking for a reason that simple and never finding it. Others are born knowing it and spend their lives making it count.